Hey, Beth.
Hey Adam, how's it going?
It's good on this Wednesday afternoon. Excited for our first design challenge. For those who don't know what we mean by that, Beth and I come from the world of consulting, and in that space, oftentimes you have an outcome that you're trying to move a group towards. Sometimes that might mean you're doing, features on a roadmap, getting everyone to align around the best way to do that, get excited around it. Sometimes you have some loud personalities with very vocal opinions, and you have to hear from everybody in the room. And sometimes the design may be needing to be adjusted based upon how the conversation starts and needed to be able to be adapting on the fly. And so what we wanted to do was put together some authentic examples, some questions to be solved, and for Beth and I to debate and actually to have some fun discourse around how our brains would think about designing that. One of the things that we've both learned in our careers is that while having a good design is important, having the exact same design for different types of challenges is not a good recipe for success. So we're going to come at you on a somewhat regular basis with new types of questions, new types of design challenges. We'll also bring in some of our customers and partners to participate in this because it's always nice to hear how other folks think about solving some of these challenges. So Beth, what is our first question, our first design challenge that you have lined up? And just for everyone to know, she has intentionally not told me about it so that we're coming at this with an authentic discourse.
Awesome. Yes. So this actually came from a customer I was talking to last week who was getting ready for a meeting internally with a group of senior leaders. They were going to be discussing a topic, and she knew that three of them all had very different and very strong opinions and wanted input on how do you design to hear every voice and to reach an alignment and a decision when you know it's going to maybe be a little bit of a challenging conversation to get everyone to agree on things. So I'll share my screen and I'll talk a little bit as I go. I put together an example of what this could look like, just with a made-up context of a wearable device company that's trying to figure out what are the new features they should develop next for their next version of their device. Give me a second to find the little share button. Awesome. So the first thing I mentioned to her or suggested to her was when you're working with a team like that and you start with a brainstorm. So say you have an idea, you want to come up with a set of ideas. You don't want to share the results, right? If you can give people a way to all think about it and submit their ideas without knowing who's submitting what and without sharing them right away.
In the data, yeah.
Gives people a chance to think. It gives everyone in the room, there might be more than these three strong personalities, a chance to think about how would they solve this challenge? What would they want to see? And get that information out there. So, we always start with the instructions showing, and then when we're ready as the facilitators, we can share the results. So I'll look at this example of they've had these results submitted, and you can see that there's a number of different ideas that would come in. We could talk about them at this point, but what I would really suggest is not diving into the merits of the ideas in a free-form fact. What I would say is, speak to any of these where you need clarification, right? In case anyone isn't clear on what these ideas are, make sure everyone has had a chance to look at them. But if you open it up right now to a discussion, now you're going to hear a lot of opinions. And another way of doing it is to instead move into some kind of convergence activity where you have everyone think about each idea one at a time in some form of evaluation. So that's what I would do next. And there's different ways to think about it. There are evaluation activities where you can have people really rank things based on preferences, and you can have them rank things based on criteria. I wouldn't go the preference route right away, again, because they're going to come in with what they believe is true, as opposed to how do these ideas stack up against some criteria. So if we were to go preference, you could do something like dot voting. And it would look something like this at this point, right? You might get one thing that people seem to like with a long tail of votes spread out across the board, right? And that's not going to move you very fast to an aligned decision, and it's not going to get you to a point where you know what you want to do next. So instead, there's a couple options that I modeled. One would be to do a Likert ranking. And so I looked at this using a couple different vectors, right? You could rank things both on desirability and feasibility. And right now I'm displaying it with all of the results, all the subtotals and the total points. And you can see pretty quickly, where there's some consistency versus where there's some differing opinions. This becomes really a lot more interesting for conversation, right?
Yeah.
Down here at blood glucose monitoring, they're pretty aligned on the desirability, but they're pretty divided on how feasible it is. That becomes a really interesting thing to talk about because people have different experiences that they're bringing into the conversation.
Yeah.
Understand now, is the people saying that the feasibility is low, is that because they know something we don't? Or is it because they just don't understand how this would be implemented? So this is when you can start having a conversation around, all right, let's talk about why things ended up where they did. And you can focus on these areas where you're not seeing alignment as opposed to debating one person's idea versus another person's idea.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I like the sort of forced quantitative evaluation versus just the popularity contest of voting for things that sound good, because this is looking at it from two important lenses. It's nice.
Absolutely. The other thing you could do is you could take those still lenses, but you could display it differently. So we also can give you to do a matrix ranking. So I did that as well. And I took the same ideas and we looked at desirability and feasibility. And, this is a little easier to figure out what to move forward with to the next stage, right? Because you're going for that upper right quadrant in your 2x2 matrix and saying, okay, desirable and feasible, let's talk about these things more, right? And then you can cull down a little bit, get some of the noise out of there. Everyone might want to be able to charge their phones through solar power, but probably not super feasible out of the gate. So let's not waste our time on that, no matter how great it is. And let's dive in these areas where we really could have an impact. So after you've had a chance to do this kind of quantitative analysis of each idea, now you're better positioned to dig into a more exploratory discussion. So the next thing I would do is do just that. I'd go into an explore by category. And when we run this, we actually talk about these one at a time, right? So we'll talk about improved Bluetooth range and stability. And now you can bring in one or more questions that you want to explore to give even more context to this as an option. So,
and Beth, these are just the ones that were selected in the top right in terms of desirable and feasible.
That's right. And so, this can take a bit of time. You're going to spend a lot of your time here. Brainstorming can be pretty fast. Rating can take maybe 5 minutes. You're going to spend a lot of your time here because you're going to talk about them one at a time. But again, because you're structuring it to really dive into specific things that you want to understand, it gets it out of this conversation that's based on personality or whose idea is it, and it puts it more into this context of what's actionable, right? Because you're talking about it in terms of here's the benefits, but here's the challenges. We get a fuller picture of, oh, do we want to invest our time on Bluetooth or do we want to invest our time on health reminders?
Sure. Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Finally, you've done all of this. Now is where you come back to that opinion-based poll, and you could maybe introduce a dot voting now. You have fewer items, so you'd only give them fewer dots, but maybe you give everyone 3 dots to see of all of these after this whole conversation where we as a team have collectively shared our insights into what would be possible and what would be challenging. And then we can say, what do we actually want to work on? And hopefully now you're going to see a bit tighter alignment on where people land. Now you've got 3 things that are jumping out as kind of the top ideas that you'd want to take forward and start putting into an action plan.
And Beth, what would you want to do, if anything, with all of that qualitative discussion input, right, from the previous activity around sort of the benefits and challenges? Is that something that the project team members that get assigned to these projects sort of keep in mind as they're laying out their own sort of, roadmap?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot you could do with that, right? You can export this data and make it shareable to people beyond the meeting, all of it, right? The whole, from the discussion to the voting to here's the deeper dive. So that's one thing to give people in the larger organization insight into why you landed on the things you landed on. But I think what you suggested is also a fantastic idea, which is, as you go to build these things, there are going to be trade-offs here in the challenges and the benefits, right? There are going to be things that add a lot of value, but maybe increase the price of the device because you have to invest in technology to do it.
Sure, or the timeline to get it done.
Exactly.
Got it. So if I can just sort of recap, right? So in the very beginning, you asked for what are some of the new things that we should be doing in this wearable space, right? And it was it looked like it didn't have any categorization on it. Like any idea is good to go, right? Sort of quantity over quality. So we could have organized this already in people's heads, in a cognitive bucket, but we said, okay, let's just get it out. So that's sort of more of a broad open statement, which is nice. And then instead of popularity voting these things, you opted more for a quantitative look from a desirability and feasibility perspective, meaning for our customers, is this desirable? Is it feasible for us internally? And then you map that, I think, into a 2x2, which was cool. And then pulled the stuff that was on the top right, had some qualitative discussion on it, got people to kind of really feel that these are the right things, not that they just score the highest, right? But they actually are beneficial, and admittedly have some challenges. And then sort of the popularity vote then finally came at the end. Right. And how do you describe it? Sort of the preferential versus, you had a better word to describe the dot vote versus the Likert.
Right. It's opinion-based versus
Opinion-based, yeah.
Versus criteria-based.
Got it.
I could model it two different ways. I wouldn't use both, right? I wouldn't do a Likert ranking and a matrix ranking. I do one or the other.
Sure.
But I wanted to show both because they come across in different ways and have different pros and cons for when you're debriefing them, right? Here, you're really seeing where are we aligned versus not aligned, because you're seeing that range of the voting. And here, you're really seeing it in what's rising up to that top right in terms of it's hitting both of our key criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the labeling on these quadrants is helpful as well. Right, because the other part of it gives you just a quantitative linear look. This is sort of putting it into different buckets. And also maybe there's a little bit of a backlog for stuff that we do later as we start to evaluate. So the next time you do the brainstorm, maybe you start with some of these ones that didn't make the cut then, but they've adapted in terms of desirability and feasibility for a variety of reasons, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to do it.
Where does it end? Just with the dot vote?
That's where I ended it. You could certainly add additional activities after that. I mean, the obvious thing to me when you get here is next steps, right? You want to walk away not just with some decisions, but with some actions on how you're going to actually take those and to make them become live.
Got it. And then you build kind of the visual takeaway that shares this whole story, so people know that we didn't just get in a room and pick proactive health reminders, right? This was sort of a long. This might have been 90 minutes or so, taking people through this sort of, divergent, convergent kind of waterfall. It's nice.
I think so. I think that's probably about right. And a lot of the time would be spent on this kind of exploration piece when you really dig into to a subset of the initial set of ideas.
Yeah, and this is probably the most fun activity because people have a lot of opinions now because they've already thought about the ideas, and now they're justifying why they thought about them so well.
And the last thing I'd say is, we're capturing a lot of data here, but there's going to be a lot of rich discussion going on in addition to this. This is, when we've run things like this as our own team, what we find is we talk a lot, and then as something resonates, we'll capture it, we'll submit it, and so then we have it when we're done. We have the whole list of thoughts.
Cool. I'm looking forward to the next one. This is a fun challenge to solve. This one feels like you did a pretty good job. I don't have any strong disagreements or ways I would have done it differently, actually.
All right. Well, I'll have you do the next one, and we'll see where we go.
Thanks, Beth.
Challenges for us, let us know, and we'll take them on.
That's right. Yeah, definitely submit your questions or outcomes that you're trying to get done, or real life scenarios that you're planning for, and we'll take them over and bring you into the conversation.